Peace belong to you. They are free gifts from the one who was and is to come. Amen. So in case, like the kids, if you're wondering, those wooden boxes in the church backyard are the beginnings of a community garden. The idea originated in conversations between Don Blanchette and me more than about 2 years ago. Eventually, the thought is for the garden to grow into a community asset, as well as perhaps maybe be shaped in the form of a labyrinth for people to walk through in meditation. The project is being watched over by one of our newer members, Barb Whitaker, and a small committee that includes some members of the community, along with Urban Baum and Ginny Gansnitz, two of the greener thumbs around that I know of, unlike yours truly. But there's still plenty of room. There's still plenty of room for you to dig in, or if anyone else is interested in planting seeds of hope in our neighborhood, by all means, get used to this. Let me know how you could help. The framing work is being done by our local Boy Scout troop, with some materials provided by a local grant we got from the county. We're also talking with the school district about making a couple of the boxes a class science project. And soon we'll begin promoting the garden out in the greater community as we seek more participation. I know we're kind of late in the growing season, but God has a way of creating a way for things to happen. I think you've heard me mention this before, but Martin Luther once said if he knew he were going to die tomorrow, he would plant a tree today. We're not dying, but planning for tomorrow is certainly part of our template. Long term, the real intention is to provide real food for real people in real need. Practical discipleship from spiritual formation amid the lettuce and tomatoes and cucumbers and whatever else we choose to grow. Gardens always raise hope for what a harvest will bring. And they remind us that being imitators of Christ in the nitty-gritty world means getting our hands dirty as we wrestle with acts of love and acts of kindness and nurturing amid the weeds of evil and brokenness that are all around us. The seed parables of Matthew 13 are our guidebook for this practical spiritual project. Images of good soil and bad soil, the good sower and the not so good sower, the hope of the mustard seed and images of wheat and weeds intertwined in the field, all pointing to the reality of good and evil, to lessons of patience and tolerance, and perhaps most important, recognition of our place and our responsibility in God's kingdom. What that place is, we'll get to in just a moment. In this parable of wheat and weeds, we find one of those rare instances in the Bible of Jesus telling a story, then explaining what it means. Usually we're left to figure things out on our own. But here we're told Jesus is the one who sows the good seed in the field of the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, while the weeds are the offspring of the evil one, or the devil if you prefer. At the end of the age, God's angels will collect or harvest the good wheat and burn up those who cause sin. Then, as the hymn says that we're going to sing a little later, the righteous will shine like the sun in God's eternal kingdom. Many have taken these seed parables to suggest that the church is made up of good people and bad people. And often it's hard to tell the difference. So we're counseled to be patient. For the good will be rewarded in the end, and the not so good will get their just deserts. Common interpretation has developed that churches are indeed a mixed bag of faithful disciples and those with their own agenda. Those the good need to watch out, so that the good need to watch out for and be careful of the mischievous, both within the church and out there in the world. Now that may have been the intention of the message in Matthew's time, writing as he was in the first century, around the year 80 or 90, after the destruction of the Jewish temple and after the church was scattered up the Mediterranean into Antioch and what's now Syria and beyond into Turkey and into Iraq. It was hard to be a new Christian in a world that seemed to reject you at every turn or confront you with false messiahs. People were confused and people were scared. And in a way, our modern life seems little different than that first century world. The contest of good versus evil, where wheat and weeds look so much alike that only God could tell the difference. In the end, though, the story boils down to one simple admonition. Love more and judge less. And in the words of that ancient Chinese proverb, beware of the unintended consequences of good intentions. For often evil masquerades as the right thing. If you hold on to nothing else this morning, hold on in your heart to that call, your call and mine, to love more and judge less. That is what this story is about. Those of you who have gardened, and I'm a city boy, so I haven't. Those of you who have gardened before know that the best time to attack weeds is when they first appear. Because if you wait too long, their shoots and their roots will become entangled with whatever it is you're trying to grow. Hence that admonition from Jesus to the slaves, don't be so eager to pull up those nasty weeds, because they might kill the good crop while you're trying to protect it from the bad. Move for a moment, if you will, from the image of a garden plot to our deeply divided country and our world. We only need to pay attention to the news of the last week or so to realize how divided we are, where everything on the surface seems to be split into discernibly good and bad, right and wrong, who's in and who's out, who can worship with us and who isn't worthy to worship with us, and so on. There are a lot of people to blame for anything and everything, or so it seems. We humans seem to have this destructive tendency to claim the good for ourselves and project the bad onto others, to justify our rejection or even hatred of those who are different, either in appearance and behavior or who just think differently than we do. We seem to take some demonic joy in victory and the demise of other people. It's as if we've taken on for ourselves the role of that angelic reaper that the parable talks about, the adjudicator of God's justice and mercy. We know what's right, and by God, we're going to see that it happens. The message of the parable is that judgment is not our job, for such belongs to God alone. It's not given to us to know the heart of another. Well, some will argue that the lesson here is for patience, tolerance, and acceptance. Perhaps the deeper meaning is to realize that we humans are not given the responsibility for sorting things out, for plucking or proclaiming the time of harvest. Rather, we're called simply to grow in the field, in the world, with everyone else, weed and weed together. Our calling is to widen the breadth and depth of the field to accommodate all. Well, yeah, you say, but aren't you encouraging evil by tolerating it? Not really. One does not have to embrace a particular view or behavior to trust that the seed sown by the evil one, whatever that looks like, cannot survive the searing flame of a love that embraces all of us. In our impatience with others, we often want to bring matters to a head and in so doing determine who's in, who's out, who's right, who's wrong, who's got the right set of beliefs and who doesn't. But the God in this parable models for us an infinite patience that frees us to get on with the crucial business of loving, or at least living with each other. To paraphrase Pope Francis from another context, who indeed are we to judge? And the space created by our patience, it is not just others, but we ourselves who are welcomed into the larger reality of God's kingdom when we love more and judge less. This is the sense into which we are reborn again and again and again and again. But as the seed parable elaborates, our intentions to do the good and loving thing, even if we're careful, can so resemble our darker natures as to end up being hurtful in the end. Because we live in a perpetual state of moral ambiguity or uncertainty, we have to face the reality that we are all a complicated mix of good and evil that can't fully be pulled apart without the merciful action of God. Or as the early 20th century journalist and critic H.L. Mencken, some of you may remember that name, he once said, "For every complex problem, there is an answer that is neat and plausible and wrong." What does pulling up wheat with weeds look like? In the first century, we only have to look at the story of Paul, for example, who persecuted followers of the way for blasphemy against the law of Torah, even to the point of holding the coats of those who stoned Stephen for preaching the gospel. Or later to the Jewish leaders who taunted and ridiculed and attacked the apostle for proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. They thought they were defending the one true religion, and Paul is proclaiming something else. Both think they're doing the right thing, and yet they're doing this. In today's world, well, we only have to look perhaps at our own borders, where I'm sure you've seen the news accounts in the past few months. We have witnessed nearly 60,000 women and children, mostly children, streaming across our borders into Texas and Arizona and New Mexico and California. On the one hand, there's been the outcry to send them back. They don't belong here, because the sanctity of our national borders must be protected. And those voices, to a certain extent, would be right, because a nation's first obligation is to protect its sovereignty for the benefit of its own citizens. But at the same time, we hear the voice of Jesus, who challenges us to welcome the child, to welcome the stranger. Our response has been to put these kids on airplanes back to Central America, but it denies the deeper cry of compassion compassion versus law. These are, after all, children of God. Kids who have names and worried families. Kids who are hungry and scared, in need of food and shelter. And most of all, kids who probably have no idea that going home, such as it is, may mean a sentence of lifetime poverty or even death in the drug-torn countries that they come from. Similar examples can be found, for example, in the national denomination that defrocked a pastor for presiding over the marriage of his gay son. Or maybe in a secular vein, the dilemma of providing health care to those who can't afford it, or a decent wage for those who are struggling to care for themselves and their families, while we say in our self-righteousness, we work for it, why can't they? Or those who are denied the right to vote under the guise of protecting the integrity of the democratic process. I think, too, of the people I see several times a month, one as late as this past week, people who can't find a job because a long ago criminal record is keeping them and denying them a more reasonable second chance. Sometimes self-righteousness can masquerade as disguised evil. We live in a divine world where the nearness of God is often hidden. Hidden from us in things and circumstances and people despised by the world. And yet we fail to remember. We fail to remember that it was Jesus, the one we claim to follow, who dwelled with the outcasts and the miscreants, who spoke up for the marginalized suffering at the hands of a system of Roman domination. A system that's not unlike the unforgiving economy that we live in today. So in our rush for premature clarity, our search for black and white, right and wrong, often out of a fearful desire to protect ourselves. Out of this premature rush to clarity, I pray that this parable of wheat and weeds reminds us of the wisdom of leaving room for holy gardening, holy and purposeful ambiguity, of room to do the call from God, which is to love and be kind and to judge less. The master gardener who plants seeds, who plants us in the fields of the world, the God whom we seek, invites us to grow and not to root up, to love ever more deeply, and to judge ever less frequently. So may it be so. Shalom and amen.